Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so prompt. Also, just an early thank you to Henry for joining us and making himself available for this presentation. Today we'll be talking about identity, zero trust, and how access and remote access for humans fits into that. In this series, we've talked about how we can codify security. We've talked about how we can inject and use secrets management. We've talked about how to bridge that security gap for connectivity. And now we're talking about the final part, which is that human element. And so as we start, I'm going to hand it over to Henry to set the scene around why zero trust, why it's important, how that fits into the Microsoft thinking and DNA of how they've built and set up Azure, and where this then leads to helping fit into that human access part and why it becomes important, particularly with a multi-cloud scenario. So over to you, Henry.
Thank you very much, David, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a Microsoft security architect, so good afternoon, good day, everyone. So to set up the scene, we are all living in the reality that this is a distributed and a hybrid work, especially after COVID. I think after COVID, it's really significantly changed a lot of things for everyone's lifestyles and especially their work styles. Like example, like myself, David and Peter in the call, we are all working from home today. So it's really a very diverse working experience for everyone. We have people still going back to work. We have people working a long time, like myself, at home. And also the tools that we use is very diverse as well. From corporate to bring your own device, from cloud-based application to on-prem application. We use Teams, we use Zooms, we use WebEx, and some on-prem applications there as well. So this is really very diverse and hybrid working experience for everyone. And how we do our work is also involved to a mix of virtual and physical, collaborative, data-driven styles. So it's very diverse, and also all these different scenarios is definitely generate lots of challenges for security perspective as well. So it's also an evolving risks for this diverse and hybrid working experience. Next slide, please, David. And this new reality is definitely intensifies the security challenges from many areas because we, as an organization, we have users need to be empowered for their hybrid work. Many people working from home, some people going to the office, and it's really significantly changed the threat landscape compared to before. And also with the change in the diversity of users and their devices that they bring in, like they bring you on their own device or they have a corporate device, is very, very diverse. And the threat protection needed to be across multiple cloud and platform, which is the central topic that we are discussed for today. So which David will cover later on. And there's really generated a complex digital environment full of unknown vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities can be a threat from a station kind of side or from the personal side, and also the zero trust is required by enterprise and also government worldwide as well. So you may hear the zero trust principles or concept not only just from this year, but it's been evolving for quite a few years already. Next slide, please, David. So why we are having a zero trust conversation? This is really not something new. I'll probably give an example of myself experience as well. So I started my career back in over 15 years ago in the Microsoft offsite office. So I was not a Microsoft employee, but I was an employee for another organization. So every morning when I go to Microsoft office, I need to pass a security guard scanning. So there's a security guard, two real people there. They monitor us to leave all our personal assets or mobile phone or USB, anything out of our pocket to a storage before we can go into the Microsoft premise. So this is like all the traditional way that secured access from a particular office. But now, as we mentioned before, the hybrid work environment is totally changed that how people are work. The old traditional way is not work anymore. So this is, and also as you can see from the screen, the attackers shift to identity attacks and the phishing and the credential threat theft is really becoming the first typical attacks nowadays. Not only like like compared to before, like attack the corporate firewall. If you are staying in the corporate environment, you are safe and guarded by the firewall. But the new phishing attacks is really becoming the first threat factors nowadays. And also this really brings a lot of challenge for the security teams, and because the security teams are overwhelmed to deal with all the different challenges to cope with the people working in the hybrid or secure their own on-premise environment compared to previous before, because it's all is a mix of hybrid. Next slide, please, David. Yeah, so basically, yeah, let's go here. So basically the traditional way, we really, compared to the traditional way, we really need a comprehensive approach to security, because users is not only the employees in the organizations anymore. The users can be their employees, can be their partners, can be their customers. You have oftentimes the organization need to share the credentials to or shared access to their external vendors or customers to do this collaboration together with them. And it's not only just the corporate managed device, you send the device to ask the user to use anymore. More and more organizations like Microsoft, we are a huge global organizations. Most of the employees we are using or bring our own devices there as well. So like my first day onboarding to Microsoft, I was asked to go to the IT to enroll my own devices to the Microsoft managed one in order for my account to be able to access my corporate emails, OneDrive, and SharePoint as an example. And also the applications is really a mix of applications combined from the SaaS application, from their on-prem application, or the corporate their own application, and also their public RESTful APIs out there as well. And the work is not done at your workplace anymore. It's work can be done anywhere, especially like people working from home like myself, and really like the traditional malware, phishing, brute force is really becoming a cloud-based multi-vector attacks. This can be really, really complex and even more complex moving on. Next slide, please, David. So what are the guiding principles for Zero Trust? We talk about the challenges, we talk about why we need to bring this the concept of Zero Trust, and what are the key concepts and key principles for Zero Trust. The first one is verify explicitly. Always need to verify, as a security in-depth approach. And secondly, use the least privilege access. We only give them the permission, the access, and the timing they need access whenever they need it, and always assume breach. Like there's only two types of organizations in the world. One organization is they've been hacked before. The second organization is they've been hacked, but they don't know. So we always need to keep alerted for those things and have this assume breach mindset. Next slide, please. So we start with the Zero Trust approach. If you are a Microsoft customer or you've been talking to Microsoft before, you probably see this presentation, similar presentation before. Like Microsoft, we have the security solutions covering to resonate with Zero Trust approach to protect from identity access, endpoint management perspective with this context-based security enforcement policy with such things like conditional access, as a mix of the policies that you can leverage to governance and control how people are using their identities and endpoint to access the data, the application, the infrastructure, and network. So there's really a lot of things within the scene to help the IT admin to have that visibility and do the analytics and do the automation behind the scene as well. So just give you a quick summary, like we, as an organization like Microsoft, the security is we invested $20 billion in cybersecurity back in a few years back. The security is really a lot more investment comparing to we had investment in Windows platform. So if you talk about Microsoft, it's not only a company doing the Windows or Office like traditionally people's mindset. We are also switching to a company doing security and cloud infrastructure as well. Next slide, please. So the business, there are really a lot of ways we can increase the security productivity, like turning on the multi-factor authentication. It's really an easy way to reduce the cyber attacks threat vectors. and we can deploy the time saved with Endpoint Manager, which is another Microsoft Intune solution, reduce the effort with provision and secure the new infrastructure, and reduce the password reset request from the enabling the self-service as well. We just had a Microsoft Ignite happen the week before. We had lots of new announcement about Microsoft security update from identity governance, identity protection to the new unified threat protection experience and the data security. So we really have lots of things, very exciting news about our security and approach there as well. Next slide, please. And of course, we understand there are many customers, not only just one shop with us, not only just Microsoft, everything using Microsoft. We have customers using a multi-cloud environment. They may have using Microsoft Azure environment as their primary, but use AWS or Google Suite as the backup. Or we have the customers using a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and even the cloud with on-prem infrastructure. That's quite commonly seen in many customers' environment. So we are very happy to partner with HashiCorp to how they host this webinar together to talk about the multi-cloud security as well. Next slide, please. So the multi-cloud adoption really bring some new access control challenge. Like we see from the slide that over 90% of identities can be adversely impacted for the infrastructure, 50% of increase in identity access to cloud infrastructure, and really only less than 5% of the permission actually granted are actually used. Still, many organizations are only using the global admin to do most of the work, which is really generating lots of risks there. So that's why we are very happy today to partner with HashiCorp to talk about how we can help you to secure the multi-cloud infrastructure. Next one, please. Yeah, so now I think I will hand over to David to talk about more detail and deep dive into HashiCorp's Boundary. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Henry. So Henry set a good scene around how identity is a key factor when considering the zero trust story. And so where does Boundary fit into that story? Well, Boundary takes an identity-based principle around secure remote access. And this is access specifically for human use. So this is how do we authenticate a human in some form, so we can use different single sources of truth or sources of truth, such as Microsoft's Entra. We authenticate and validate who that user is against that single or known identity base. And then we grant them a set of permissions, and then they can connect to those resources or targets based on those permissions and the grouping. Now, where Boundary is also differs from traditional VPN, for example, is that it's fundamentally based around being able to deal with the ephemeral world. So particularly connecting into Kubernetes or into APIs or database endpoints where those environments are ephemeral and spun up. Obviously, that means you need to be able to understand and dynamically create and create end services to connect to if, for example, you need to get into that to troubleshoot or for remote support, for example. And so one of the elements around Boundary is the fact that we can use a service catalog that uses something such as a service discovery tool like Consul to or tagging. So it can actually use tagging within Azure to then discover those essential resources that are then defined within a group, and that group can then be distributed based on principles and roles. And so in a hierarchical format, we have an ability to take ephemeral resources, put them into a grouping. So that could be a particular application, for example, or a particular project, and then tie that to the credentials that we've gained through our single source of truth. And now that user has access to all of those elements. And so when we're thinking about how that then fits into what we were talking about in terms of zero trust, what we're talking about now is thinking about how do we get and meet that least privilege component. So one of the elements that Henry talked about is obviously, as part of a zero trust mechanism, having the least amount of privileges available for a user to actually undertake their task, and being able to manage those credentials for a period of time becomes really important in terms of reducing your risk. And this is where Boundary then has two tools that we'll talk about a little bit more, that it takes into leveraging that. So just expanding on how Boundary actually works. So Boundary is uses a proxy mechanism that has these workers. That worker is then defined into that remote or into a location. So in this case, we have a public location or a private endpoint, for example, that we could connect through to. Boundary workers can be chained as in typical proxy chain. So you can allow that to actually chain into deeper and deeper element parts into the network to get access based around security policies that only allow access from other workers. So your risk profile and your attack element in terms of having the amount of nodes that need to be compromised obviously also increase. And then because that worker from the external side has a profile from an inbound of the client, Boundary client only, then you can control exactly what is coming inbound to that. Now, the control plane, and we'll take a look at this, is based on HCP. So this is HCP as our HashiCorp cloud platform, and that means that you have a SaaS control plane that actually interacts and works with those workers. That's not good. So what that says, and what we're talking about is, we'll go with the diagrams. So there are two elements around this. So the first is credential brokering. So in our scenario around how do we get users and credentials to those endpoints, the first is credential brokering. In this case, what we've done is connected the Boundary controller in with HashiCorp's Vault, and Vault is then issuing our certificate, our credentials. Now, whether those are one-time passwords or a stored KA, KVA pair, or a stored credential that is time-based, so it uses its TTL, it actually brokers that credential via the control plane into the user, and then the user uses those credentials to log on to the worker. Now, from that perspective, that's a great way to actually manage that, particularly across things like RDP, SSH, certificates, username, passwords, any of those constructs that you would want to use to access into that. However, what it does do is actually allow the user to see those credentials as we are brokering them to that user. And so in our scenario, and as Henry mentioned, if we had remote support, that means that that machine is then going outside of the corporate SOE. We don't know what that machine's security standards are. We don't know what those credentials are being potentially have been compromised. We have, is a known an attack profile to go after support organizations that may have a lower security standard and compromise remote support machines to get into the actual attack network that they want to. And we've seen that profile has been used before. So how do we solve for that challenge? Well, a better way is, another way is to then use credential injection. The thing with credential injection is what we do is we use the element of the Boundary controller to actually talk to the worker. And so now, instead of Vault issuing the credentials to the user and the user accessing initiation or using those to access the service, Boundary actually talks to the worker initiates that to the server, and the user session ties into that worker to connect through. And so if we take a scenario where we're going to use certificate, so we're using certificate-based elements here. So as soon as you start managing certificates, you could do this based around spinning up a resource using something like Packer that has a pre-built image. In that pre-built image, you load a certificate that is being managed from a CA that's being managed in Vault. Vault then issues that certificate, can rotate those certificates as need be, and manage those certificates on an updated process. So now you are using a highly secured mechanism, which is certificates. You can have an easy mechanism to manage them using Vault, so that that management of that certificate could be done weekly, monthly, whatever it is that suits your time frame, but you're using a highly secured mechanism. The certificate never actually leaves the corporate environment, and yet users are still authenticating to that in a secure way. So now the only risk is actually managing and validating that user is who they say they are, and making sure that they can connect to the right resources. In our workflow, if we talk through this, so what we will do is, obviously, a user will connect, they will validate through and jump into connecting it to a single source of truth. So in this case, we're actually going to use Entra. We validate who that user is, and then Boundary, the controller, goes to our proxies it through into our connection to make sure that it can talk to our IDP. Once it has validated that, it actually then returns the user our landing page. And so that landing page is then all of the targets that have either been dynamically discovered, as I said, or are fixed targets that user has been given permission to connect to. The user then obviously kicks off their what that target list is, a session through to Boundary. Boundary then will say, well, I am retrieving the credentials from Vault, pass that to the worker session, and when the user goes to connect, they then initiate through that worker and can connect through that as a proxy component into that end space. And so that gives a deep dive and a technical view of what we're looking at. In the reality of that, we can take a look at what that looks like. So for the sake of this demo, you can do this via traditional command line. So if you have users who are very happy to use SSH or connect via their terminal access, they are more than welcome to do that, and you can do that using a standard process. We'll take a look at that too. But for more traditional VPN users that are moving into this new era or looking to replace this as a platform, we have a desktop client. And so this desktop client is this version. And in it, we have our existing sessions and any targets that we want to connect to. In this case, we actually have 2 targets defined. And so what we actually have in our, let me just get rid of that. There we go. What we actually have defined is our Boundary cluster. So in Boundary, as I said, we have our project. So this is an overall organization. We've then broken down in that organization for our Azure construct. So you can start to see how we've defined those different hierarchies. Within this, we have defined our targets, and we also have our credential store. So in this, we have our credentials around how we're going to, and what we're going to use. So on our targets, if we dive into one of our targets, so this is our injection. So we've defined where our application is, and so this you can see is our public IP in Azure. Oops. We've defined the port, we've defined some characteristics and maximum account, so unlimited amount of connections. In this, we're going to inject our credentials. So this is where we set up our trust with our Vault. So we set our Vault connection. So this is our Vault endpoint. So in Vault, again, running as part of our HCP, so can this be done all as managed, SaaS managed platform. We've defined a user, we've defined a key type function, and then we define a key to actually pull out the specific endpoint. And what will happen is we will now go, Boundary will now go to that endpoint, because Vault can actually issue certificate based off of a single API endpoint. It will return the certificate for that and inject using that into the certificate. Now, from a trust perspective, if we connect our target. So we'll connect to our target here. You can see that we can either use SSH natively as a loopback, or it has an inbuilt shell within this construct, and now we're actually connecting to our target against our user using our certificate. What has been done, and I've manually done this, normally if I was doing this for, obviously to do at scale, I would use a process, like I said, like Packer, to build this into an image, or even, you know, one of the other automation tools to push as part of a build perspective, or as an OS management tool, you know, Ansible or one of those tools to follow up and do this if there was long-lived images. But we have created a certificate. Messing up my typing. Public key. There we go. Let's have a look at our public key. And so we've defined that public key. What we have then done is push that in as a trusted source within our SSH config. Config, not SSH. Yes, there we go, trust. And so what you can see is we have defined as a trusted user CA key within our SSH, and that's it. That's all we needed to do within a build. And so now, if we wanted to, we could actually also include this as part of a build update or anything to actually refresh that certificate based on either pulling it again from Vault, or actually connecting directly from that or create a process to update that manually. If you wanted to, or a process that just spin up a quick access, you can also use inject credentials based off of the credential store. So this is actually using username and password and injecting in that same way. So the client doesn't see it. So here we can see we've logged onto that machine, so you can see the same machine. But what we've done differently is, in this case, as a credential store, we've used SSH passwords, which is a static credential that we've actually created within the constructs of Boundary, and it's been injected from Boundary as the credential store rather than using it as Vault. So if you didn't have Vault, but you still wanted to do the credential injection in some way, you could use a mechanism like that, for example. And so that kind of defines that human access to give you as many options as possible, whether that's brokering credentials or injecting credentials, to actually allow flexibility for users to actually gain access, human access to resources. And this is all focused around, particularly in the developer work stream, to allow them to work in a way that they are used to, work from the same tool set that they're used to in terms of their terminals. It's safeguarding credentials by actually not exposing them to the user and keeping them defined within the workflow of Boundary and the workers, and still actually limiting the exposure of what users can gain access to by defining an endpoint that they're connecting to. And so if you'd like to get started, or if you'd like to actually kick off something with Azure, there is a test drive, and that we are obviously on Marketplace. These slides will be shared, so there's plenty of information that we could share. The slide deck doesn't show in funny characters when it's not presented. I don't know why it's done that, but we will make sure that when it's shared, you can read it. There is this joint Zero Trust ebook that Microsoft and HashiCorp have done. It's a very good read, covers a lot of the elements that Henry has talked about, and covers some of the topics that I've talked about around how or why and how to actually build that, including Vault and Consul and other elements into that. And so I really appreciate your time. If there are any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we can cover off any of the questions that you have. One thing that I didn't show that I know probably potential people will ask is there is support for credential brokering using RDP. So we can support RDP via credential brokering. So if you need to RDP in, you can do it that way. That isn't supported in the client. It is supported in the client as a TCP session. So fundamentally what it does is we proxy a TCP connection, but it doesn't do full connection injection yet, credential injection yet. The other thing is, I know a session I did, someone asked, was around how do you approve and disapprove users that log in, and that's obviously leveraging something like Intro, where you can actually approve users to connect, and then once that's approved, they go into a group. That group is defined the resources that they then have access to. I'll open it up for questions. I haven't seen any come in. If anyone would like to fill any into the Q&A, then we're happy to take and field any questions that you have. In which case, if everybody, I'll give it another minute or so, but if everybody has no questions, then we can give you some time back as well. And thank you for attending. As I said, these slides will be shared, and the deck will go out to anybody that either attended or couldn't make this session as well. So I can't see anything coming in. So Henry, unless you have something that you'd like to ask, we can close out this session and give some people some time back.
Yeah, sure. I think all good for me. Yeah, looking forward for the slide. I think that slide, that Zero Trust slide, together with between Microsoft and HashiCorp, will be a very good resource to reference.
Yeah, awesome. In which case, thank you everybody. I do appreciate it. Thank you to Henry for coming to speak. Thank you for Peter to support in. And I hope everyone has a good Christmas or holidays.